Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Knockout Podcast, episode 54. Sun is still shining, the pubs are open. That is not where we're going to be. Why go to the pub, stay inside, and just talk about a mixed bag of fights? I'm Ben, and as ever, I'm joined by Jack. Jack, how are you doing on this fine Monday morning?
Yeah, doing pretty well. The weather is very strange today. It was snowing this morning for me, and now the sun is shining really nicely. It's pretty warm outside, so I can't explain it, but it's interesting,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm doing
completely
well.
forgot about the snow. That was certainly a weird setting to walk downstairs for my breakfast. Just being like,
Yeah,
right, we're in April. What is the snow doing here?
yeah. But now it's back on track, it seems. So yeah, and
There we
we've got
go.
some fights to talk about, both looking backwards and looking forwards, which is nice.
It is indeed. We've got a bit of action to preview from the weekend, the Vettori Holland card, and we've also got Rob Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum, and a few other interesting bits and bobs on that card. We've also got the middle. Well, we are in the middle of a public spat between McGregor and Poirier, which is just bizarre and continues to go on. Apparently, McGregor has backed out of the fight, according to his Twitter, but who really knows with that bloke? It seems that any sort of niceties going into that rematch or that sort of those two fighters has gone sharply out the window because McGregor's just been called out because he didn't donate to the charity.
Yeah, didn't follow through on his word, apparently. So yep, that's interesting. I don't think the fight will actually be pulled. Like, I'm pretty sure they've signed contracts, and McGregor can't cite being annoyed as a reason to pull out of the fight. I don't think that's a very valid reason. So the fight should be going ahead as scheduled, I'd imagine. And yeah, it'll be interesting. I think at least possibly part of this is that the lead up to the first fight was very like kind of aggressive from McGregor, and that Poirier even admitted that kind of did play an effect on him, and it seemed to, I think. So maybe the thought process from McGregor here is that he wants to go into this fight, try and get in Dustin's head again, because he didn't manage to do that in the second fight because it was all a quite friendly build-up. So, yeah, if that happens, I don't know how much of a difference it will make. Poirier is a very different person nowadays. I think that he'll be able to cope with that fairly well. But it's just an interesting, maybe a change of strategy from McGregor.
Yeah, he tried the nice McGregor for the Cerrone and Poirier fights, and I think maybe found mixed results. So he's
Yeah.
gone back to his usual charming self. But I'm sure we'll talk about that more nearer the time. Anyway, we can't talk about McGregor all the time as much as the views would love us to. Let's return to Vettori versus Holland on the weekend and the rest of the card. I mean, we may as well start with that main event. Vettori doing a doing a Holland a Brunson-esque job on Holland, rather I should say. 50-44, 50-44, 50-44 unanimous decision. I mean, a grinding, safe victory from Vettori, against a potential banana skin in Holland. But I mean, this sort of went the way we were expecting it to, didn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. It was a very funny start to the fight. It They came out about 30 seconds in. Holland gets him really hard in the balls. Vettori gets very mad. Starts, I don't know, I think he was swearing, going around the cage, just really was not happy about it. So that was a funny start to the fight. And then, but from there, it was kind of just what we expected more than anything, to be honest. Vettori managed to kind of, to a degree, replicate the Brunson game plan, and took Holland down consistently. Showed a lot of nice like clinch takedowns. To be honest, I really liked the way that he kind of. We talked about how his striking is very like meat and potatoes, and I think one thing that he shares in common with the fighter that we'll get to a bit later in the card, I think, is he knew what his striking kind of needed to do. It like served the right purpose of getting him to the clinch, and getting the takedown from there, which is something I think Mackenzie Dern did quite well against Nina Ansaroff. which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Vettori played a smart game, didn't get kind of like caught up in any of like Holland's kind of like word games, mental games, whatever. Did the job that he needed to do, stayed very disciplined throughout the fight. Tried to get the finish a few times, although with the arm triangle, but couldn't quite manage to get it. I think he basically, the one that was really deep, I think he basically bailed on because he knew that he wasn't going to get it. Holland didn't escape, but Vettori just gave up on it. So yeah, I think it was a good performance from Vettori. Did what he needed to do, and yeah, not much more to be said, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not primed for stellar analysis, because it is essentially, to a large extent, a rinse and repeat from Holland's last performance. I mean, the chatting and the talking sort of in between rounds and also to his opponent was certainly there to a lesser extent. I think there was perhaps an element of him maybe taking this more seriously, or at least externally giving off the impression that he was taking this a bit more seriously. He seemed like he was paying attention to his corner and maybe not chatting as much rubbish to his opponent, although that might actually be one of his better strengths. But certainly in the technical department, like we said, I mean, this 2 week window was never going to be enough time to work on the quite obvious major flaws in his game, in terms of keeping the fight at distance, keeping the fight in his ballpark, not sort of overexposing himself to a takedown with his shots. So, to be expected. I mean, fair play for coming in and taking the fight on short notice, which always keeps you in UFC's good books. But I think there's clearly a lot of major technical changes that needs to go on, because there's obviously a blueprint there, and his next middleweight fight, you would imagine, is going to be someone on the fringes of the rankings, and he's going to have to make some big adjustments, because everyone's going to go in with the exact same game plan of trying to replicate the last two performances.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned the talking. I think that the reason that was toned down is I think he probably got some ire, especially from Dana, to try and tone that down. And I think he managed to some degree at least convince people that the reason he lost the Brunson fight was not to do with an inherent flaw in his wrestling and his takedown defense, but because he wasn't taking the fight seriously. Whereas it is just his wrestling is just not where it needs to be. He is very much, when someone tries to get the takedown, he is a very much push down on the head and pray, basically. He'll push down on his opponent's head and do almost nothing else. And then from there, he'll accept the takedown if they change angle or chain a different kind of shot onto the sequence. So he's very much very shallow in his takedown defense. I don't know who pointed it out, but I saw someone made a very good point that if Holland ever does seriously decide to get very serious about his takedown defense and really try and change that and work on that aspect of his game, he's got these past two fights offer a lot of fairly invaluable experience and kind of examples to point to of things that he can work on in his training. So if he really does actually decide to take that seriously, these last two fights probably will help him quite a lot in that. There's a lot of things to be learned from, I think, for him that his coaches can point out for him. So yeah, hopefully from that perspective, if he does decide to kind of really get serious about that, this can be a bit of a turning point for him. But it's Kevin Holland, so I wouldn't count on him doing that. I think he very much could just continue to kind of goof around and then pick up the odd win here and there. Then when the right opponent with the right tools to replicate this game plan comes along, he'll probably lose it again, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll see. It's an interesting one, because I do think that's entirely possible, but surely there's got to be something now where he recognises. I mean, maybe his. I think in his post-fight Instagram post, he said something on the lines of Vettori and Brunson, you two should fight each other next because you love humping your opponent so much, or something like that. So yeah, I wonder whether he will take it seriously. But he's as we say, he's got, as we have said rather. I feel like we've been covering him a lot over these past 2 weeks, just because he's had two main event fights, but he has got really good size and really good physical characteristics, really good striking, even at this weight.
He's got dangerous striking. He's very scrappy. He's not like
perhaps not technical.
He's dangerous, and he will make it. He did, even in this against Vettori, he did manage to make it a scrap at points that Vettori kind of had to put himself into harm's way to kind of get through to get where he needed to be. So he's good at doing that, into drawing you into a bit of a scrappy fight, which has its advantages. He's an interesting fighter, certainly, but if not a fairly deeply flawed one, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, for Vettori, the victor, I mean, I'm not sure this is the type of fight that gets him the title shot, but I mean, there's Paulo Costa, who obviously pulled out of the Whittaker fight. There's Jared Cannonier. I don't know what his timeline is for a fight. There's certainly those two I can think of off the top of my head. But or the Till one, if depending on Till's timeline. But you'd imagine he's looking at one more win to get himself the title shot after what you imagine will be Whittaker. But I guess we'll get onto that a bit later.
Yeah.
Elsewhere down the card, I mean, co-main, Arnold, Allen, Sodiq, Yusuff. We talked about this a bit, and we weren't really sure where this was going to go, because obviously these guys had, maybe not fought against the best opposition, and also hadn't fought for best parts of 12, 13 months. But really, so we were discussing it a bit before we started recording, but didn't exactly go the way we were thinking of in some instances. In terms of we sort of thought, I certainly thought that it would be Allen controlling the range. Well, I think Allen still wanted to fight at range, and Yusuff wanted to get in close, but I thought it would be Yusuff with the moments, Allen with the more control and keeping the fight where he wanted to. But actually, it turned out to be much the opposite.
Yeah, very interesting in that regard. I did really enjoy that fight. I think specifically because it did kind of shatter kind of my expectations going in. If you were to look at know kind of the careers of the fighters involved, you'd think that it would kind of be Allen generally putting out the consistent work to kind of maintain control of the rounds, Yusuff having the singular big moments, whereas in fact it turned out the exact opposite of that, which I thought was very interesting. And I think that, although I've watched it again since, and I think that Allen did have a bit more control maybe than I gave him credit for on the first watch. He was doing a lot of nice stuff, particularly with his jab, as he always does, as well as with a lot of, he led with his straight left a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So he'll lead with the straight left and then duck out, and Yusuff will kind of whiff on counters. So Allen did that quite nicely to kind of get Yusuff missing quite a lot, and also played just a generally fairly nice kind of back foot jabbing game, always being in retreat. But still, overall, Yusuff did manage, especially in the second round, I think, and then in the third round it was a bit different. But second round mostly managed to counter Allen quite a bit. Whenever Allen would lead, Yusuff would manage to kind of extend the exchange and land the counter. So in that sense, Allen didn't have as much control as the fight as he would like. So to a degree, Yusuff kind of won the strategic battle, but Allen won the tactical battle, which I thought was quite interesting. He managed to get the kind of southpaw double attack going, so feinting the left hand into the high kick, which was the second knockdown in the second round. The first knockdown in the second round, whatever. And then also, he was quite nice from the clinch as well. Yusuff was really trying to pressure him and crowd him against the cage early on. and Alan did a very nice job of denying that with like really strong frames, but also like getting hold of a limb and framing off on the head, and that was what led to the first knockdown. Like he, I think, held grabbed the Yusuff's wrist, framed off, pushed him away, and then clocked him with the left hand as he was like exiting like essentially a clinch. So I thought he did that really well. So yeah, just overall, I think that Alan kind of really mixed up his weapons well and kind of fought a nice overall game. Couldn't get the wrestling going as much as he wanted to, it didn't seem. Yusuff seemed to threaten him in that regard and didn't really get it going, although it was nice kind of, he used it as like an interruption to the striking, which was quite good. But overall, I thought it was a really fun fight. And to be honest, the kind of fight that certainly makes me more excited for Alan and at least a little bit more excited or interested in Yusuff going forward. I thought he showed kind of like good moments and stuff to work on, obviously. But definitely was a fairly encouraging fight, I think.
Yeah, I think especially with these prospect on prospect fights, it's very rare that both fighters don't come out with increased stocks, and I think this is certainly the case. I think for Yusuff, I'd have to watch the fight back. Maybe I can get the stats up, but I feel like he was a bit heavy, sort of in terms of his punching output. I felt like I've seen him kick better in some of his other fights. Let me see. Actually, no, he was a bit better than I thought. Think, actually, it was Alan actually who was far more reliant on the kicks. Maybe that was just my first impression. But
yeah, I think that Alan did quite a good job, from what I remember, of catching quite a lot of Yusuff's kicks. It was a like an open stance matchup, and Yusuff likes the low kick. And I think the commentators were talking about it quite a lot. Yusuff tried to kick to the back leg quite a lot, which is like an interesting move, but Alan did a good job of catching it to kind of discourage that and like kind of try and chain that into takedowns or hitting off the break there. So I think Alan kind of did discourage a bit of the kicking. So yeah,
I've actually looked it up, and he's kicked more in this fight than he ever did. So that's just me being an idiot. But
they weren't as effective then, is what we can say.
Yeah, certainly wasn't as effective, but certainly did kick as a great proportion than he has done. But certainly got in closer. Looking at these stats, a lot more. I felt like a lot more of his fight was certainly in the clinch and in the pockets, which I thought might be the case. But I think perhaps there. He did charge in, maybe not set as much traps. I think that's where we saw Alan's, as you said, the tactics came out quite well, because he was certainly very good at setting those traps, and I'm not sure Yusuff certainly fell for Alan's traps, but didn't set as many traps of his own for Alan to sort of be punished with.
Yeah, and I think that Alan has a fairly nice kind of defensive system when he's. Well, generally, he's fairly nice defensively. Like he managed to avoid most of the big shots of Yusuff. Even when he was getting hit, he'd either kind of like deflect them or not take kind of the full force of them, and then moved his head quite well. Yusuff had kind of success when he'd counter, but generally when he was leading, which he was most of the time, he was really pressing forward, trying to crowd Alan. Alan did a good job defensively, I think, and also his footwork kind of against the cage got him out nicely a few times. He'd do the kind of like fake one way, go the other, exit out the back door kind of thing. So yeah, I thought it was a very nice performance from Alan. Really enjoyed it. But yeah, excited about both going forward still.
Yeah, no, we'll see what is in line for both of them next. Marquez, Sam Alvey next on the card. I mean, we're not going to spend any time really on this. I mean, fight of the night, somehow good win for Marquez. I mean, Sam Alvey still remains one of the only fighters that will hurt an opponent and then back up, and still get backed up. So not a great performance from him, but he keeps going. Mackenzie Dern, Nina Ansaroff. I mean, this was for my mind. I don't know whether she got a performance. Yeah, she did get performance of the night, along with Gamrot. But this felt like a performance that we'd seen by Mackenzie Dern in sort of her early days when she was being welcomed into the UFC against lower opposition. The catch being it was against Nina Ansaroff, who is, one of the best strawweights in the rankings to date. So a really impressive performance from her, at least for my money, against by far her biggest test to date.
Yeah, I was really actually very impressed by Dern in this. Like we talked about how her striking has looked improved recently, but one thing that she did well, which kind of a lot of grapplers can do when they start to kind of improve their striking, is kind of fall in love with it. Like they'll think, oh, I'm a good striker now, I can strike with these people. But we also talked about last week how she has good ideas in the striking, even if she's not mechanically sound. I think that kind of showed in this fight as well. It was a bit sloppy, I think, to be nice. But she used it well, and it got her where it needed to be. She wasn't trying to have like a technical kickboxing match. She was just trying to get in, push Ansaroff to the cage, and then get to the clinch. And she did that very successfully. Got a takedown quite early in the round with a lot of time to work. And, when she was on the floor, it did take her like a bit of time, obviously, but slowly but surely, she kind of like cut through the guard, got to mount, spent a bit of time in there beating her up, and then got the armbar that she was looking for a little bit and got the finish, which I thought was very impressive. Obviously, jiu-jitsu looked fantastic, as it always does. But it was the way that she managed to kind of like get it to where she needed to be without kind of putting herself at too much risk, that I thought was very impressive.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I mean, once she got the fight down, obviously that's where she can really take over. But yeah, certainly the boxing and the ability to at least present some threat. I think in her one loss against, I think it was against Amanda Ribas, the boxing was just not enough of a threat, to the point where Ribas could just be focused on, right, well, when the takedown's coming, I can just be focused on this. But if you've actually got to be worried about the opponent's boxing, then then you've got two things to think about, and you can certainly get the takedown in a lot easier, which Dern certainly did. Great performance from her. I don't know when she's ranked. Apparently saying
Ansaroff was 5th, so I imagine she'll move up into kind of like that, like 5th, 6th kind of area. Yeah, I don't know if rankings, because we're doing this earlier in the week now. Rankings haven't come out yet, I don't think. So, yeah, we can't give you an update on that. But
yeah, as you say, I can't see how she doesn't get into sort of like the top 6, maybe top 7, maybe even higher than that. But she is really put herself amongst that sort of top echelon of strawweight fights, and she is probably one, if not 2 fights away from really having her name thrown in the hat for a title shot. So really good from her, and yeah, plenty to be excited about. Daniel Rodriguez, Mike Perry, the last one on the main. I mean, I don't really know what to say about this. I think, if you go 3 or 4 fights without having a coach, this is probably what happens.
Yeah.
There is also almost certainly stuff going on outside the cage for Mike Perry that I don't really think we need to comment on, because, well, I'm not sure we know a whole lot of the fine details. But needless to say, I think this is a person going through enough battles sort of personally outside the cage that actually being able to be an effective fighter in the cage is proving pretty difficult at the minute.
Yeah, it's insane kind of how much Perry has regressed. Think about, it was only about 2 years ago that he had a very, very close fight with Vicente Luque, who's now one of the, I think it's probably top 5. Like, that was a very close fight. So I think it was a split decision. Some people thought Perry won that. And yeah, to now be like how bad he's looking recently, it really is a fairly spectacular waste of talent. And I think post-fight, Perry has said something like, he simply said, I don't know what's gone wrong. He seems like kind of at least self-aware that he's got far worse. So maybe, like, I mean, obviously you've got to point to kind of like the coaching situation there. Not having a coach, a proper coach for so long is going to do that to a degree. But yeah, he's just like, his entries look so bad. He just hadn't, like, he was throwing at some points like weird random hammer fists in there to like try and get in on Rodriguez. It looks so bad. Very disappointing from Perry. So yeah, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know if he stays in the UFC necessarily. How is he on a bit of a losing streak? Maybe. Or he beat Mickey Gore though, didn't he?
Yeah, so, I think he's on a 2, maybe 3 fight losing streak.
He's on a 2 fight losing streak. So there's a possibility that he stays. He probably stays in the UFC, to be honest. But I think that he just needs a lot of time off, to be honest. I think he needs a year or 2, like just to kind of, sort out his personal issues, sort out his personal life, get back in proper full-time regular training with a proper team around him. Just get in a good routine more than anything, kind of like for a good few months before he can think about taking another fight. Obviously, like kind of life circumstances might not permit him to do that. He might be forced to fight earlier, which would not be ideal. So yeah, it just depends on whether or not he can afford to take that time out, really, which he really needs to do.
Yeah, we will see. I mean, for Daniel Rodriguez, a good win. Look really big in the cage, and yeah, certainly a good win, but certainly not against the Mike Perry that Mike Perry was, a year or 2 ago.
Yeah.
Elsewhere on the card, was there anything that stuck out for you? I mean, I literally mentioned before I came on that I somehow missed out the fact that Mateusz Gamrot was fighting. I haven't seen that fight, but given that he's got performance of the night, I assume that was a good fight. But anything else on the undercard that caught your eye?
Well, yeah, Gamrot, as you said, looked very good. His entries were very nice, shooting kind of very long takedowns, but then also hitting off of that as well. I think he like, as he did, I think in the Guram fight, his debut in the UFC, he mixed in his like obviously very dangerous ground game with his striking well, and yeah, got the knockout. And yeah, I thought that was a very good performance from Gamrot. And then McDessie Bahamundes was also like actually a really fun fight. It was like a big, like what looked like a huge kind of like size differential. McDessie looked tiny against Bahamundes, but was actually a very fun fight. McDessie did a good job of not allowing Bahamundes to kind of like advance for free. McDessie, as he was retreating, kept a very active jab, and that was just like, that means that Bahamundes can't get away with just going forward and throwing combinations, or he's getting punished for it. So McDessie's retreating jab did a lot of good work for him there, and then countered him quite consistently as well, and managed to hurt him in a few good places. But no, that was a very fun fight, actually. Yeah, you should watch that if you haven't seen it, and the Gamrot one as well. And then Jack Shaw, Hunter Zor. I'm trying to remember it clearly.
It was quite it was quite a grindy. It was very out of the Brett Johns school of fighting, which comes as no surprise given that they're training partners. But a grindy. I actually thought it was unanimous, but clearly a split decision.
Yeah, I can't like, for some reason I just can't remember this fight that clearly. Maybe that is indicative of it being a bit of a grindy fight. Sometimes that's generally when that happens. But yeah, like from what I remember, that was fairly decent. And then Dan Ho, who's really big, Georges Dan Ho, like saved us from a 15-minute heavyweight fight by knocking out Jorgen De Castro quite quickly. So that was very nice of him. But yeah, other than that, it was a fairly decent card, to be honest. Like lacking a little bit kind of in name value of those decent name value on there still. And in general, I think the fights turned out fairly exciting. Even the Sam Alvey fight obviously got fight of the night. I would give it to Yusuff Allen, to be honest. But even that was quite fun. And when a Sam Alvey fight is good, then you know it's been a decent event.
Is that those are words?
It's a rarity.
To live by. Yeah, that's really all of our thoughts on last week. I mean, fights coming up this week. I mean, we may as well start with the main event because that's the big talking point. Robert Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum. Obviously, that was scheduled to be the fight that took place on the
ages ago. It was when Adesanya fought Silva.
Yeah, that was supposed to be the main event. I think Whittaker had I can't remember what it was.
It was some like stomach problem, like
stomach
hernia,
hernia, something like
that. I can't remember.
But yeah, this is running that on back, albeit on slightly short notice. Whittaker was supposed to be fighting Paulo Costa, but Paulo Costa stepped out and Kelvin Gastelum has stepped in. Whittaker obviously has come back well from his knockout against Adesanya. He's won against Till and Cannonier, both unanimous decisions. Kelvin Gastelum, who since also has lost to Adesanya, has lost actually a couple of times to Till and Hermansson, but recovered with a win against Ian Heinisch most recently. I mean, this feels like quite an uphill battle for Kelvin Gastelum. I mean, certainly if you look at his last fight and the manner in which he went about beating Ian Heinisch, I can't see that style working particularly well against Robert Whittaker, who, as we mentioned on this podcast, is one of the best anti-wrestlers that the UFC's ever produced. And I just think we've seen really that perhaps that Adesanya fight was a bit of a blip, maybe a tactical mistake from Whittaker, and we've seen the more composed striking performances from Whittaker in his last two fights that we were really more accustomed to as he rose up the middleweight rankings prior.
Yeah, I think that the Adesanya fight is interesting, and if he wins this fight, which I think he should, hopefully, although Whittaker can't really seem to get through a fight at this point without just randomly getting really hurt at some point in the fight. So hopefully that doesn't happen against Gastelum this time, but it very well could. Whittaker will have to, I think, take a significantly different approach to the rematch, but that's for the future. Now he's got just Gastelum on his plate. So obviously, a benefit for Whittaker in this is that he's prepared. I suppose it benefits also for Gastelum as well. He's prepared for Gastelum before. There's no real reason necessarily why the game plan that he would have had for the first fight wouldn't be, honestly, probably even more effective these days. Gastelum seems to have had, I think, something taken out of him from the Adesanya fight. It was a very gutsy performance from Gastelum, but by the end of the round, end of the fifth round, it really was going quite badly for him, and he got hurt a number of times. So it's not out of the question that fight kind of did take something out of him, and he's not able to really recapture what he had before that. So that's kind of like an interesting kind of possible reason for why Gastelum could have gone on this skid recently. And I wouldn't say, although he got the win, the Heinisch fight wasn't particularly encouraging in that regard, to be honest. He didn't look anywhere near as offensively potent on the feet as he had previously. He looked somewhat slower, I think. So I think in that regard, Whittaker that's hopeful, and Whittaker not getting randomly hurt out of nowhere like he has been doing recently. And other than that, I think Whittaker can generally put on a classic kind of Robert Whittaker performance like he did against Cannonier, control the fight with the jab, and then really build up over the round, start to work in the straight right and the high kick, which Whittaker loves to do. Start to build that in, and then also maybe mix it up with some offensive wrestling and strike off of the wrestling breaks as well. Whittaker did that quite well against Till. So I think mixing all that in together, I'm fairly confident that Whittaker should be able to put on a very good performance here. And hopefully, I think that with this win, I think he's more than earned his rematch with Adesanya.
Yeah, I think to be honest, you could make an argument. Well, not even make an argument. I think even without this win, he's certainly the most deserving person to fight. But yeah, I think with a win against Gastelum, that certainly. I mean, obviously, would have been a win against Paulo Costa if that fight taken place, and he'd have won. But yeah, as I was saying, Whittaker's kicks, I think, are going to be a key thing, keeping this at range. I think Gastelum certainly does his best work in close. I think he has to do his best work in close, just from his sheer lack of height and reach at this weight class. So I think a composed, a disciplined Whittaker gets the job done here. But I don't think you can ever fully count Gastelum out. Well, as you can never count any fighter out of any given fight. But I think this should be a task that Whittaker is more than equipped to deal with.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm quite looking forward to this fight.
Yeah, I think it'll be a fun fight regardless.
Yeah, I love watching Whittaker fight generally. He's one of my favourite fighters. So when he has a good performance, I really, really do enjoy that, and I'm hoping for one coming up.
Yeah, this is true. No, he's a very, very sound bloke, certainly to get behind. Elsewhere on this card, probably much like last week, there's not a lot of name value, but there's a few interesting ones to throw up. Jeremy Stephens, Drakkar Klose in the co-main. Jeremy Stephens moving up to lightweight after a pretty difficult run of things. I mean, his last 5 fights have been Jose Aldo, Zabit Magomed Sharipov, twice versus Yair Rodriguez and Calvin Kattar. So, but very much the top tier of featherweight fighters there. He steps up, I think, just to get a break from the featherweights.
Yeah.
And he comes in against Drakkar Klose, who had that absolute banger with Beneil Dariush all the way back in 2020. I've not got a whole lot to offer in terms of insight and analysis, but I feel like this one could be a fun co-main event.
Yeah, I've not got much to say on it either, although the only thing was that Jeremy Stephens looked, I think, improved against Kelvin Gastelum despite getting finished. I think that he had a bit more of a consistent kind of process about him. He was pressuring Kattar to the fence, mixing in, using the low kicks quite well. I think he was jabbing decently as well, from what I remember. Been a while since I've watched the fight, but I definitely remember thinking that Jeremy Stephens looked good despite getting finished. So kind of with that in mind, if he's continued to kind of like make those improvements, work on his game overall, I think that he should have a good chance, or probably should beat Drakkar Klose, to be honest, who is kind of fairly dangerous in his own right. The Dariush fight, which was wild, like he hurt Dariush quite bad before getting knocked out himself. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one. But yeah, not much more to say than that.
Where on the card, Arlovsky, Chase Sherman. I think that's actually a late notice one, but not really too much there. Abdul Razak Al Hassan comes back against Jacob Malkoun, who I think he was Whittaker's training partner and got handily beaten in 18 seconds in his last fight. So I think he's getting probably another chance purely based on that. But he's only 4-1. Luis Pena, who UFC seem to never be giving up with, and I think we've said quite a lot in the past about how we've never really been fully convinced by him. He comes again in against Alexander Munoz, who I had a look earlier, made his UFC debut against Nasrat Haqparast, which is a pretty nasty UFC debut. I think it was last year, so that'll be interesting to see how that fight goes. Ricardo Ramos Belalgio, I actually think could be quite a fun one, opening up the main card. Ricardo Ramos, who I think fought Lerone Murphy, who I'm quite a big fan of.
Yeah.
I think actually he could be moving back down to bantamweight for this fight, against Belalgio, who I think had that fun fight against Spike Carlisle recently. So that's a fun one. Any others on the main card or the prelim that take your fancy?
Not particularly. Gerald Meerschaert's fighting. He can be okay sometimes. Although he's on a bit of a 2-fight skid, knocked out back-to-back fights. So maybe he's only 33. He seems older than that in my head. But yeah, not really. I think I was kind of like grasping at straws there. Not much else on the undercard, to be honest. You've got women's flyweight, heavyweight, a strawweight fight, which could be decent. Women's bantamweight, and then bantamweight fight, but I don't really know Burchak or Gravely. So yeah, it's a slightly worse card, I think, than the one we've just had, although the main event should be pretty good. And the co-main should be fun as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I think those two will be good, and I think there'll be a few more interesting fights, probably similar to the one last week, where there's probably a few good matchups, but not a whole lot we can offer in terms of name value and insight, really. So that with that, great optimism, it will probably draw today's episode to a close. We've got 261 coming up next weekend. Well, 2 weekends time, which as a 5-fight main card with 3 title fights is looking quite nice. Plenty to discuss in that. But thank you everyone for listening. Stay safe. Enjoy the pubs if you're out there today or in the next week or so. And we'll see you next week.
Catch you later.